Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Amanda McHenry, and I'm the Arthur F. and Mary J. O'Neill Director of the Fanning Center for Business Communication in the Mendoza College of Business at the University of Notre Dame. Welcome to our series, and thank you for joining us. Our series, Communicating with Impact, highlights some of the most critical issues around the role of communication in the current historical moment. Currently, we are spending a few minutes and a few weeks discussing civil discourse, becoming a better conversation partner. Our hope is that this series content will create opportunities for us to connect with one another and build a virtual community with a global reach. We've seen a strong interest in our series so far, with over 900 participants registered to be a part of our learning community. Today's format will include remarks from our guest, as well as a few listening exercises and plenty of time for Q&A. You will have many opportunities for interaction and engagement. You will be able to ask questions during the program. When you have a question, please use the Google form that we are sharing with you now. This will allow us to facilitate the questions as effectively as possible, and we will try to answer as many questions as possible within our hour time slot today. At this time, I would like to thank our co-sponsors that include the Mendoza College of Business and the Notre Dame Alumni Association. I would also like to thank several individuals from our communications teams and the ThinkND production team who contributed their time and expertise in designing and delivering this program. And now I'd like to welcome today's guest. Dr. Lisbeth Lipari will discuss the freedom to listen and share her insights on the role of listening in promoting civil discourse and helping us find common ground. Professor Lipari is in the Department of Communication at Denison University. She is considered a leading figure in developing new concepts and a theoretical vocabulary for understanding listening from humanistic perspectives. She earned her PhD at Stanford University. Welcome, Lisbeth. During our first session, we discussed the role of business in promoting civil discourse and reducing polarization. We highlighted successful initiatives and shared practical strategies to assist us in our everyday lives. As you can imagine, the topic of listening was ever present in this conversation. Today, we will be able to further examine listening and perhaps see this topic in new ways. Dr. Lipari, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone who's participating. I can't see you, but I trust that you're out there. I'm going to share my screen and so that you can follow along with some slides. And am I sharing my screen? What's happening here? No. Uh-oh. We just tested this a moment ago. I don't know where it went. Hold on. Sorry. Technology. Here it is. Okay. Oh, now I'm not sure. Sorry. Can you see this, the introductory slide?
No, I'm just seeing a black screen on my end.
Just seeing a black screen. Okay. Let's see. Maybe. All right. How about now?
Yes, we can see your title slide, Lisbeth.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
As for that delay. I'm going to talk for a little bit here, about 15 minutes, and then Amanda's going to ask some questions, and then we'll have some possibly some exercises, hopefully, and questions and discussion. So today, when political opinions and public discourse have seemingly lost all credibility, when any news can be considered fake and any science labeled a hoax, the collapse of civil discourse seems uncomfortably near. But as the American philosopher John Dewey once wrote, of all affairs, communication is the most wonderful. Why? Why is it the most wonderful? Because it is through communication that we create our shared social world. So moving beyond conventional ways of thinking about public discourse, a reckoning must be made that listening itself constitutes discourse as much as does speech. But all too often, our commitments to the freedom of speech overshadow the vital importance of listening and its role in public discourse. Today, I'm going to walk you through 3 steps that can help us to exercise the freedom of listening. Okay. Inner listening, which means paying attention to ourselves. Outer listening, which involves paying attention to others, and free listening, which involves cooperating with others in the search for the common good through the creation of our shared social world. So the first point is about inner listening. So from an individual perspective, a commitment to the freedom of listening requires both inner and outer awareness, an understanding of one's own limitations, and a recognition of the complexity of listening itself. This doesn't mean tactical listening in order to win an argument, but democratic listening, listening that appreciates the plurality of perspectives that make up a robust democracy. The freedom to listen to others, to truly listen, begins with the freedom to listen to ourselves, to cultivate discernment about what our thoughts and ideas are arising, what we are responding to what feelings and body sensations we're feeling, and to what habitual patterns of meaning making we are reinforcing, to what assumptions or preconceptions are lying behind our understanding. We may be a tabula rasa at the beginning of life, but our blank slate quickly becomes filled with the words of others. Because we learn language from the outside in. Listening first develops in the womb, and without a functional auditory system, infants do not learn to speak, though they can, of course, learn language in other ways. But whether they learn it through audition, for vision, movement, or tactile sensation, the words we learn to speak are never our own. They come from listening to the public and widely shared ocean of language itself. So we begin to speak by listening, both to others and to ourselves. The idea that what we call free speech can ever wholly be separate from free listening cannot be correct. We are filled with words and language, and we call this internal aggregation of language and meaning the apperceptive mass, the lifetime accumulation of sayings, meanings, locutions, idioms, collocations, images, stories, and ideas that we have stored within us like toys in an attic. As the scholar Jakubinski described it, our reception and understanding of another's speech is determined not only by our actual momentary simulation by another's speech, but also by the entire range of our antecedent internal and external experiences, and ultimately by the entire contents of our psyche at the moment of listening. Thus, both our capacity for and the actual processes of what we call free speech, be it free expression, discourse, conversation, discussion, or dialogue, always involves speaking and listening. Many of us find that once absorbed, the sayings, lyrics, books, and ideas in our apperceptive mass take on a life of their own, inside our minds, in our thoughts, feelings, and interpretations. We accumulate patterns and images and sayings that take shape as if our minds are peopled by an eternal cast of characters that speak to us again and again in our thoughts. They worry about the future, they regret the past, critique the present, judge ourselves and others, and can never seem satisfied. But we become attached to these habits of thought, and we mistake them all too often for our own. Here are a couple of examples of recent contributions to public discourse that demonstrate how our apperceptive mass can shape our listening. And I'll let you read these on your own. So here we have a case of a speaker who's at perceptive mass. These speakers who are quoting biblical scripture are heard by people who don't share the biblical scripture in their apperceptive mass. And they attribute these sentiments to a political persuasion as opposed to a religious philosophy. So it is the very inaudibility of these habits of thought that can deafen us to others. So in order to truly listen and understand others, we must first listen to and understand ourselves, which brings us to the second point, outer listening. Our unawareness of our apperceptive mass is not truly the only thing that interferes with our freedom to listen. What also intrudes is how we mistake listening for arguing and listen while we prepare our rebuttal, affirm our opinion or argument against the other's ideas. This focus on listening as argument takes away our ability to comprehend what the other is actually saying to us. The predisposition to have already set views interferes with our ability to listen to what is actually being said, to listen without reference to or frameworks of our own views. This is tall order indeed, quite difficult. But the right, freedom, and responsibility to listen to others with openness and intention to understand, to genuinely hear the other, requires us understanding our own prior preconceived frameworks and understanding. It means the ability to understand the speaker's intended meaning without imposing our own. Listening in this way is akin to getting into the other person's movie, of seeing their view of the world and hearing their understanding. The origin of the English word understanding means to stand in the midst of, that is, to surround oneself with the other person's perspective, not to surrender to it or agree to it or endorse it or adopt it, but to share in their understanding, to take a sip of their soup, to share their offering. Thus, understanding is not to stand beneath, but to stand among and between, to join with others in the search for understanding. At the same time, it is important to acknowledge when we do not or cannot understand the other, to acknowledge the limits of our own experience, our strengths, our abilities, our weaknesses, to be able to tolerate the absence of understanding, our inability to comprehend and still share in the discourse, to remain connected and listening, even when we don't understand. When we become overly attached to our apperceptive mass, mistaking it for the way things are, we reinforce our attachment to the familiar and the already known. This makes it very difficult to hear new ideas or to challenge what we think we already know. Similarly, the freedom to listen asks that we bear the weight of not being understood, that we recognize and welcome the places of difference, even when we radically disagree. So, in terms of civil discourse, there needs to be an acknowledgement that to actively participate in politics is to listen, to cooperate with diverse others, and bend one's ear. In this historical moment of ceaseless violence, rising authoritarianism, anti-democratic practices, speaking without listening is increasingly dangerous. Without actual listening, the ability for engaged deliberation erodes, the capacity for thought and consideration collapses, and the ability to discern a common good disappears. As the philosopher John Stuart Mill has written, there is always hope when people are forced to listen to both sides. It is when they only attend to one that errors harden into prejudices. And we might add that there are often, and almost always, more than two sides. The ability to hear this plurality is incredibly essential to free listening. So democratic citizens need opportunities to speak and listen together in public debates and deliberation that actually contain diversity and plurality. From a public perspective, this means that democratic citizens need the freedom to listen to a free press that provides truthful and factual information, fairly presented from a range of perspectives, Citizens need access to quality information across a range of perspectives in order to exercise the freedom to listen responsibly. It is on us, it is incumbent on us as citizens and as a collective society to not silo ourselves in already agreed upon self-confirming information views, but to reach out and listen across difference, to listen to different perspectives, to intentionally seek out those with whom you disagree. Those who wish to exercise their freedom to not listen, of course, may do so, but the cost is high when we curtail the freedom of others. Refusing to accept others as real persons becomes toxic to community, to justice, and to a lived and valuable and a livable democracy. Lawmakers, historians, and jurists have long cherished the virtue of free speech, rendered as truly robust public discourse and political deliberation that involves both speaking and listening. The Supreme Court has repeatedly determined that the freedom to speak and the freedom to hear are inseparable. They are two sides of the same coin. One historically notable occasion featuring an assertion of the freedom to listen occurred in Boston in 1860, when a mob of wealthy white men charged into an abolitionist meeting featuring the question of how shall slavery be abolished, one of the most polarizing and intense disputes this country has ever had to wrestle with, the end of slavery. And these men violently broke up the meeting. The next week, Frederick Douglass wrote a letter to the Liberator, William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper, and he chastised the unruly mob for their violent censorship. And he stressed the importance of listening that is tacitly embedded in the right of free speech. He says, there can be no right of speech where man, however lifted up and however humble, however young or however old, is ever by force compelled to suppress his sentiments. Equally clear is the right to suppress freedom of speech. And it's a double wrong, which violates the rights of the hearer as well as those of the speaker. So in conclusion, I want to add that the freedom to listen involves stamina and self-control at both the social and the individual level. It entails a willingness to tolerate the disagreeable, the different, the dangerous. It requires vigilance and courage, a willingness to respond, to question, and to debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisbeth. If we could talk for a moment about this historical time that we are in, and all of us are responding and reacting to the pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about how your 3 steps, the inner listening, the outer listening, the free listening, have those ideas changed in your mind as a result of our experience over the last 18 months or so?
You know, that's a wonderful question. I developed these ideas before the polarization in our public culture was quite as strong as it is now, quite as oppositional. And there are things happening now that had never happened before in my lifetime that are quite frankly astonishing to me. And I attribute some of it, not all of it, to this failure to listen to oneself, but also to others. The ability of social media to silo us into these different places of where we just continue to hear over and over repeated the same things that we already have heard, that we already agree with, the lack of ability to really reach across and attempt to truly understand has been debilitating and to public civic discourse, civil discourse. It has spun off in many directions that are quite unfathomable for many of us, for all of us, really. We can't understand how others think the way they do, how others refuse to do what they refuse to do, or how others can try to force us to do what they're trying to force us to do. How did this happen? It happened because we don't listen to each other. We don't talk. We don't seek a common good together.
We had a question come in here on the chat about a very practical challenge that many of us have dealt with. And that's when we're interacting with someone who is not answering a question that's been directly asked. It's almost like they haven't heard what was being discussed and they deflect and never respect what is being asked. So how would you, first of all, respond to that challenge, given your comment about the freedom to not listen? And can we draw a line somewhere between maybe difficult personalities and respecting this idea of a freedom to not listen?
That's really interesting question. I think, you know, what free listening is a goal. It's an ideal, and it's an ideal that I think we need to aspire to much more than we do. We've really we valorized freedom of speech and the right to speak without really thinking about and involving the freedom to listen and the right to listen. I think that what you're describing in this kind of hedging, this happens, you know, in certain contexts. It happens often when journalists are interviewing politicians, or when lawyers are asking someone on the stand questions. People do tend to be evasive in these situations. They don't want to speak fully. They don't want to be heard or be accountable to the question. And that's a very difficult situation. I don't know how that arises. I mean, how one addresses that when it arises. But I think if we have a norm of listening as opposed to a norm of shutting down or speaking over or canceling or criticizing, if we have some genuine attempts, and they probably can't be necessarily in highly politicized contexts, they must be across probably mostly individuals, small group meetings, communities, family. I don't know that we can expect this ideal to arise in the situation of politicians giving their speeches.
Let me pose just one more question to you, and then we can shift to our listening exercises. But we've just had a question come in that asks about how do you find others to discuss solutions to certain worldwide problems, and in the context of this question, asking about providing food for all, 2030 when the global temperature is 1.5 Celsius.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a couple of groups right now. One is called Braver Angels, and I know Amanda has asked me for some resources, and I'll send her the link. It's a site where it's an organization that is trying to put people who are coming from very radically different political perspectives together in dialogue, who are willing to listen across this divide, and they are working together and trying to build communities that share a pursuit of the common good. There have been many other examples of this: listening circles, listening communities and small grassroots organizations that attempt this. It seems that the minute the cameras turn on and there's a sort of a performative, an extrinsically performative element, it damages the capacity to really speak one-on-one. So I think, or speak authentically and listen authentically. So I think these organizations are really onto something. And if there isn't one near you, you can always start one in the community where you live.
Lisbeth, would you like to begin with our listening exercises for today?
Sure. So this is going to be an exercise for inner listening. And I'm going to share my screen again so you can read the instructions. Okay, do you see the instructions, or, oh, here we go. Okay, I have to go to another screen here. Okay, so what I'm asking everybody out there, if you would, for a few minutes, just close your eyes and listen inwardly. You don't have to do anything, but just notice your thoughts. Try to observe them as an observer without necessarily reacting to them. Notice your mood or the mental qualities that are there. You might start to notice tension in your body, such as holding your breath or clenching your jaw. Listen to your thoughts with openness and curiosity without following them or without trying to control, judge, or ignore them. Don't do anything, but listen to your thoughts without judgment. Just let them flow. Let them float past you while you're continuing to stay open and listening. You might also start to think about if you have a recurring voice. Let's say, this is silly, this is so idealized, this would never work. How could we get people to listen? They're basically, breathing down one another's necks. Whatever that voice is, if it's critical or if it's scoffing or cynical, see if you can identify whose voice that is or where that comes from. And see if there are any other voices behind that, underneath that voice of critique. If this is difficult for you, another way to approach it is to do some automatic writing and just write without stopping what your thoughts are, listening to them without judgment. So we'll take another minute or two to just pay attention to what's happening inside as you sit quietly. Okay, so we'll come back together. I'll stop sharing my screen and see if there are any observations people would like to share or questions about this process.
And if you do have those comments or questions, feel free to put those in the chat. We'll be able to see those. You can use the link to the question or the comment form. I'll be able to view those as well. It seems like we have some questions just about becoming more comfortable with these processes and exercises. And how do you become okay with being uncomfortable?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I mean, our culture is so about constructing comfort and expecting comfort as the norm. But because everything is always changing and people are different, it's not necessarily going to be comfortable. And if we're seeking comfort, we're likely to seek the familiar and not get outside of our circle. So I think you're right. I mean, it's terribly uncomfortable to talk with someone who has a completely different perspective than you. But if we can try to set aside the comfort or be discomfort or be curious, why do you think that? Can you tell me more? How is it that you came to understand that? If you follow someone, if you try to get them to unfold their thinking, question them, really with genuine interest, I have found that people respond really beautifully to that. They do share a lot more of where their thinking comes from. They start to listen to themselves a little bit and hear, maybe that's really not the only way to think about it. And then they might even turn to you and say, well, what do you think? How do you feel about this? And when you're listening, when you're trying to handle the discomfort of really listening and it's uncomfortable, you're actually modeling what that means. And so the more you can try to relax and let yourself be curious, the more that you will begin to hear. So thank you for that question. Really wonderful. Oh,
Sort of hinted on this at the end of your comment there, but we have some folks saying that this is difficult and does it get better with practice, or there are other ways to improve the inner listening part of the exercise. Did you have other suggestions there for us?
oh yeah, absolutely. These basic awareness practices do make a huge difference. And if you can try to just do a practice, whether it's automatic writing or sitting quietly, there are many ways of meditating that are sort of allowing yourself to detach some from these thoughts. It's allowing some space with the apperceptive mass, recognizing that's not all of you. Those are moments, that's what's readily available and often habitual. The more we practice recognizing that little bit of space between ourselves and our observers and this apperceptive mass, the more we'll be able to handle the discomfort, handle the strain of these kinds of encounters. So yes, there are many resources out there, and I can also share some of those with Amanda if people are interested.
Thank you. It seems like from some of the comments too that folks had just a lot of other topics on their minds in this inner listening exercise, all of the activities that needed to be attended to, all of your to-do list, the busy schedules and agendas. Do you feel that that is the biggest barrier to this type of inner listening exercise, just the ways that our attention is called in so many different directions?
Absolutely. We have moved into what some theorists call the attention economy, where actually our attention has become commodified and sold on the marketplace of advertising and scrolling and all of these. We have these amazing, delicious devices that are always calling our attention, and it can be very overwhelming, let alone all the things that we try to accomplish in our life. So making time deliberately, setting aside time in your life to just sit with your thoughts and allow them to be what they are, to really face. Sometimes we have thoughts that are very judgmental or ugly. Can we tolerate that? I mean, that's part of being a human being. We have so much, all this attention economy seems to construct some kind of ideal world where everything is perfect and everyone is flawless. And we know that's not the case. Living in the real interactive day-to-day life, we recognize that there's we recognize that the life that is presented through media is not necessarily the life that we live. And to get more comfortable with the life we live means to embrace some of these flaws and warts that we have and others have, and to understand them without rancor, if we can.
I think in contrast to some of those examples, we're also seeing just notes of appreciation and just acknowledging some of the more positive aspects of one's life that might come through as you are participating in these inner listening exercises. Individuals just realizing the many blessings in their lives, or some of the more positive features.
Absolutely. And I kind of came at this from a negative perspective because of the framing of civil discourse, coming from an uncivil perspective. What does it mean to have uncivil discourse? And what is civil? And I think that's absolutely right. To really acknowledge and appreciate the good in our lives, to seek the positive, to frame things in the most generous way possible is a really important practice for listening. It really allows us to come at things. I don't know if anybody has seen the Key and Peele famous little video sketch about the text. Like one friend texts the others, "Hey, you want to get together?" And the other one is very relaxed and he's like, "Yeah, sure, whenever, whatever." And the other friend keeps interpreting everything the positive friend says from a negative perspective. whatever, what do you mean? And it escalates this anger. The negative person continues to enhance the negativity, and the positive person continues to enhance the positivity. And it's only when they come together that they realize, that the negative person realizes how much his friend was looking forward to seeing him, and how grateful he is. So there is a lot a lot in the culture that underscores negativity. And I really appreciate the person who made that suggestion about the positivity, how important that is. Thank you.
We saw a range of comments here on this first exercise. I think we're ready to move ahead to our second exercise.
Okay. So the next exercise is, it's actually a video, and it's a debate. It's a debate about college students and the use of smart drugs. And it's a short debate, it's 2 minutes, and there's many different perspectives. So what I'd like you to do is practice outer listening while you're also paying attention to inner listening. And let me, and this is a very tall order, it's very difficult, but it is possible to do. Let me go to my shared screen here. Okay, so this exercise I'm gonna have to, okay, so I'm gonna play this short video for you to listen to. And as you listen to the debate, also pay attention to the thoughts that are arising in you, again, without judging, analyzing, agreeing, or disagreeing. Just listen and observe the words coming from inside and out. It may be difficult to observe this simultaneously. So one thought is to try popping in and out. Stay attentive to the speaker, but scan every once in a while what's happening with you. It's very useful to scan the body. Notice if you're holding your breath or contracting or clenching your jaw. Notice if you're just like trying to come up with arguments against what the people are saying. Notice if you've been able to follow along with everything that is being said. And then how are you responding to yourself around that? So basically, see if you can notice how your inner thoughts are shaping your outer listening. Okay, so here comes the video. Why is that not coming? All right, I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, here it is. Oh, not this one. Sorry, that's another one about listening that's quite amusing, but I have to. I haven't. Oh, we're being forced to listen to that. No. Okay, let me go back to this one. Here we go. This is the exercise. What's happening for me is there's all these layers of open windows with the chat and the comments and the Q&A coming up. So let's see if we can actually hear this. Oh, this is not it. It's not about becoming a radiant warrior. Here we go.
This training is designed for you to
Let's leave it as is at the moment.
Polls of incoming college freshmen show that at least 1 in 3 has used smart drugs. We can pretend that this isn't a choice that large swaths of people are already making, or we can embrace that smart drugs are just one of the many ways that people exercise free choices in their lives.
People have the right to choose what they would do or have done to their bodies, and college students have the right to choose.
By providing equal access to these medications to everyone, all the things that we really value are going to be jeopardized.
Banning smart drugs disempowers students from making educated choices for themselves, and it denies them their ability to think smarter.
When people are ill and really have serious health conditions, we are willing to take some risks. But when someone's healthy, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
We enhance our brains all the time and every day. From coffee we drink first thing in the morning, the SAT prep classes we take to gain college admission.
You could be more eager to work. Yet those effects could be those also responsible for their addictive properties. There are things we don't know about these drugs.
What colleges are in the business of doing is educating students to navigate complicated situations where there's a certain amount of ambiguity.
When you insert smart drugs into the equation, into a really competitive society, what you are doing is you are increasing competition. You're making it possible for some people to up the ante even more.
I would suggest that the use of these medications don't increase people's competitiveness. And so if that's your concern, deal with the competitive nature of our society.
Maybe you can get better grades, get that really awesome job, right? But remember, if everyone has access to those awesome medications, all of us get exactly the same advantages.
To the extent that smart drugs work to improve focus, motivation, attention, concentration, or memory, we should celebrate them, not prohibit them.
I think there are genuine ways for individuals and societies to improve themselves. It's not rocket science. It's not smart drugs. It's basic and plain and boring. It's education.
Okay, thank you. So maybe just take a moment before we come back to discussion, reflecting on that listening experience. Were you able to integrate popping in and out, observing your own listening as you were listening? I'll just take a minute here. Okay, let's come back together and hear what people are thinking. Amanda?
So one of the thoughts here is that as you were listening to the various perspectives, you're also trying to formulate your own and figure out where you fit in the conversation. Would you say that that could be one of the barriers in outer listening? You're so focused on your own position and figuring out where you fit in that you may in fact lose critical information related to any of the perspectives?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the main points here is that once we get comfortable with understanding our own predisposition, for example, I tend to really move into argument in my mind. I'm coming up with all kinds of arguments against what some of the people are saying. And that crowds out my ability to really take in what people are saying and think about what they're saying. So the more practice that we have, the more practice I have, I'm able to sort of I liken it to Oscar jumping up out of the garbage can on Sesame Street. You know, how he wants a cookie all the time. Oscar wants a cookie. And there's a sort of an inner ability to say, not now, Oscar, not now. I'm going to stay with this. I'm going to stay with this person is saying.
We also have some comments here that focused on the tone of the speaker and how the tone might distract from the content of the message or from the audience's ability to understand the message.
That's right. And that comes up a lot in very heavy, heated discussions. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that people have different feelings, and some people do have, it comes out in their tone. And we can choose, if we choose to focus on the tone, we're going to miss understanding what they're saying. Their tone is part of understanding, but if we let it drive us away, then it prevents us from really hearing and understanding. And people need to be heard and understood, even when we might be frightened by their tone or object to it. It's another way of tolerating the difficult and the strange, the unfamiliar.
One other feature of the message that a participant has noted is focusing on giving weight to the most recent comment that you've heard, maybe rather than thinking back to earlier arguments or pieces of information. Is there a technique to avoid that? Is that normal to respond to just the most recent comment?
Oh yeah, that happens so often. And it can be very frustrating. So there's two strategies that I know of. One is to take notes. I find taking notes is a superb way to hold on to the various points that are made in a discussion. Another is to practice cultivating your memory. People used to be able to remember passages, many passages, many pages of text that they read, or remember things people have said. We can cultivate that ability. It takes intention and time, but we can. So, yeah.
We have a question that just came in here about some of the questions that you've been offering throughout your talk today that you can ask to demonstrate understanding. Are there other ideas here on particular questions that might be helpful to ask to show understanding and empathy?
I think one very effective way of checking our understanding, and sort of demonstrating, but checking it, is to sort of paraphrase what the person said and ask, is that correct? Is that what you're saying? And stay open to hearing what might be different, and to follow that person as much as you can and much as you're able to, but also to acknowledge, and this comes up a lot in racial conversations, to acknowledge that I don't know what that experience is like. I don't know what it's like to be anyone other than myself. I haven't really thought about what it means to walk around in the world with a different physiology, with a different with different facial features, skin color, stance. I don't have that experience. I only have the experience of me. And so I have to learn by listening to others. And that's a very important thing, that even when I listen and even when I grow my understanding, it will never be complete. It will never match what the actual experience is. So I need to stay open with respect to that, to really hearing about other experience.
We had a few final comments here that really speak to just the complexity of this type of outer listening exercise, because at the same time, you're trying to listen to the words and then judge what was being said. You're relating it back to your personal experiences, relating it to what others in your social circles might think about the issues. So it can cause for a lot of work and activity in this type of exercise. And again, is that something that becomes easier with more practice, or is that just the nature of the complexity of listening?
Listening is undoubtedly complex, and there are many factors that go into our capacity and ability to listen, as many of the people have been commenting. As I said earlier, this is sort of an ideal. This is an ideal to strive for. Does it get easier? Absolutely. The more we become aware, the more we practice, the more the better we will be at listening and understanding, but also the more we'll recognize our limits and where we aren't quite there, and other facets of the complexity. So yes, I encourage you to practice, to take some of the complexity of listening seriously. We just don't, as a culture, really understand how complex this process is. And so the more that you engage it and share your understanding with others, the better we'll be, the better off we'll be.
Lisbeth, do you think we have time for one final listening exercise before we summarize for today?
Sure. I'll play the nail exercise. This is a very classic issue that comes up in conversation when people are trying to understand someone who's very different. And this comes out around gender. So let's see if I can share my screen with you. I apologize for being so clumsy with this. It's just not my forte. Okay.
you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just
Don't.
Try to see things my way.
Yeah.
So I have to keep on talking till I
So,
can't go on.
this wasn't really,
We can work it out. We can work it out.
so this wasn't really an exercise so much as it was an example of some of the patterns that we can get into in listening and how they can interfere with what's actually happening and unfolding in the moment. And I wonder if people have comments or questions or reactions to that.
Some people are feeling like this video, they found it a bit easier to practice both that inner and outer listening.
Good.
Do you think that there were features of this second example that might have made it so for people?
Absolutely. I mean, one was an argument, was a set of arguments delivered in rapid fire form by a lot of different people without providing a lot of context. And that was very difficult to listen to. And that's what often happens in political debate. That's the way information is presented to us very frequently in political debates. The second video was designed to actually make a point, a single point with one voice or with two voices really, about what it means to leap to trying to fix something that seems so obvious and perfectly reasonable, perfectly rational to one person, and the other person is really struggling. And how can we connect? The question is, how can we connect and understand one another? Not convince or be convinced, but actually share. That listening is sharing. So yes, I think it was easier, that second one.
With that sentiment of sharing in mind, it may be helpful to just share a couple of summary points for our audience today. And for me, one of the key points that emerged is just the idea of being intentional about your listening habits and your practices, and making a commitment to continuing to develop and to learn more and recognize the uncomfortable notion of it all. So thank you for pushing us in that direction. Is there a final summary comment that you would like to offer before we close?
Try these ideas out, practice them in your own life. Bring what Amanda just said, bring it with a spirit of intentionality. We try to see how you can expand your capacity and your freedom to really listen.
Dr. Lapari, thank you so much for being with us today. To our participants, thank you for spending an hour with us to explore the topic of listening. I hope you're able to join us for our final session in 2 weeks, where we will have Dr. Walid Afifi from the University of California at Santa Barbara. He will be discussing the problematic nature of language that is sometimes associated with civil discourse and what we can do about it. I look forward to seeing you all then. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.